Hey, everybody. We're sharing something special today from our pals over at the Say More podcast. We're in a special series. Boston Globe columnist Shirley Leung is opening up the conversation about stress and burnout to help listeners feel less alone and inspired to get help. She connects with experts like Krista Tippett and Emily Nagoski, who use medical science, social science, and philosophy to answer deep questions about how stress works on our bodies and our minds so we can work better and live better. In this episode that we're sharing with you, computer scientist and best-selling author Cal Newport says we've been thinking about productivity all wrong. We are big fans of Cal Newport. Shirley talks to Cal about the ways the modern office worker is primed for professional burnout, how hybrid work is just making it worse, and what we can do about it. He's not a Luddite by any stretch, but he says that we should quit social media and leave our phones behind whenever possible. Okay, here comes the preview. You can listen to Say More wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. This is part 2 of our new series, Say More on Beating Burnout. I'm Shirley Leung. On the last show, we talked about the ways stress acts on the body and mind. This week, I want to take on the biggest source of stress in my life, work. I actually love work, but many days I feel like a chicken with its head cut off. It's like the sound of Slack or email or text will pop up at any second and derail me from whatever I was thinking about until I can't even remember what I'm supposed to be doing. Today, I'm so happy to talk to Cal Newport, who is a writer and computer science professor at Georgetown University. He's an expert on doing less and getting more done. His new book is called Slow Productivity: The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. Cal, welcome to Say More.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
So I've been doing this series on burnout, and I've talked to a couple people who discuss burnout from a medical perspective, talking about how we respond to stress in our brains and bodies. And you come at this topic from a different perspective. You're trained as a computer scientist. You studied at MIT, not too far from here. So what brought you to the concept of burnout?
Well, a lot of the things I write about is technology and then how technology changes things about the way we live or work and what we should do about it. There is a big storyline in knowledge work about how technologies such as email and computers, then mobile computing and smartphones, when these technologies entered knowledge work, that accelerated the burnout epidemic that we see in this particular sector. So when I think about burnout and knowledge work, I'm often thinking about how did the introduction of these tools change the way knowledge work unfolded in such a way that we begin to have a lot more difficulties surrounding just the sustainability of these efforts. So I started in bits and sort of ended up with neurons. It was an unexpected shift, but they're actually deeply connected.
Mm-hmm. So how do you define a knowledge worker? Who is a knowledge worker?
Well, there's a technical definition, which is typically you add value to information using your brain as like your primary professional activity. The boundaries get a little bit squiggly. An easier way to think about this is, if you curse the word Zoom, if email is something that gives you like a shiver in your spine, then like you're probably a knowledge worker.
Yes, that sounds. So I'm definitely a knowledge worker then. So I, when I think about your book. Your latest book, what you do is you reframe what success looks like, what a productive person looks like. And we often think about a productive person, it's all about doing more and getting more done in less time. And you're basically telling us that working less makes us better. It sounds too good to be true, right? So how is this possible? How can doing less make me better?
Yeah. Well, I care more about what you produce over time that actually has value, right? So it's shifting from an activity-based notion of productivity to an outcome-based definition of productivity. So like one way to reframe your thinking on productivity is to zoom out the time scale, right? Mm-hmm. And so if someone asks you, what did you do last year? like that you're proud of and you think you made a difference? Like when you're answering that question, you're not going to say, okay, well, I just checked the server logs. I sent and received 750,000 email messages. I'm very proud that I logged an average of 7 hours per week on online meetings. No, you'll be looking at the actual substantive either outcomes, like I did this thing that was valuable, or the substantive sort of ongoing services you provided. I was responsible for making sure that the timesheet system was processed, that the marketing presence on the website was always kept up to date. But you're pointing towards the actual things of value. This is orthogonal to some degree to like daily activity, right? So when you think about productivity in terms of what did I do last year that was valuable, it suddenly seems less important on a random Thursday afternoon that like you get through emails faster. You're like, that's kind of unrelated to the thing that matters, which are the things that actually move the needle for my organization or for my company.
So one of the things I stuck out in my mind, and actually I slacked a colleague this, it's like, you have to think about these 3 tenets of slow productivity. It was incredible, it's do fewer things at the same time, work at a more natural pace, obsessing over quality with what you do. And my colleague said, you need to make that a tattoo on your arm. So talk to me about how you came up with these 3 principles.
Yeah, I mean, this is what supports outcome-based definition of productivity. This is what you need to do to shift to that mindset, right? So doing fewer things at the same time. Why? Because everything you agree to do and you're actively working on brings with it administrative overhead. I have to talk to people about it, I have to send emails, I have to have calls, I'm thinking about it. So if you're said yes to many different things and you're actively working on many different things, that administrative overhead piles up. And it's like when you send too many logs down the river as a lumberjack, too many logs down the river, they're going to have a log jam and nothing gets to the mill, right? So actually by sending fewer logs at a time, you end up processing more logs than if you try to put them all in the river at the same time. So you can't overload your day-to-day work with too many things actively. Doubling the number of things you're working on doesn't make you twice as productive. It could probably make you like half as productive. You begin to get this pile up. Now you're working on a fewer number of things at once. You need to actually give things the time required to be done well. So like take whatever initial instinct you have for how long something is going to take and double it, because humans are very bad at estimating cognitive tasks. Like we're very good at estimating how long a physical task is going to take. That's where all of our neural intuition comes from. When we apply this to how long is it going to take to write a draft of this report, we just guess. And we tend to just write fairy tale stories about how long we want something to take, not how long it actually. So give yourself the time to actually get the work done without a sort of freneticism or panic. And then bring these 2 things together with a final commitment to getting better and better at what you do best. As you begin to obsess over the quality of what you do, busyness becomes anathema. Like, well, busyness is just getting in the way. I'm trying to do this thing really well. I don't want to be pseudo-productive. I want to do this thing really well. And then on the flip side, as you get better at things that are unambiguously valuable, you get more control over your work life in your day, and you're able to eliminate even more busyness. It's like a flywheel that starts to spin. You do this for a couple years, and suddenly people are incredibly envious about your much more focused, slower pace, but really high production and highly respected outcome type of work life you have. That's what eventually pushes you there.
So the subtitle of your book is The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. And so I was just wondering if you think burnout is just the logical conclusion of a capitalist society. I mean, maybe we're all supposed to work until we basically can't work anymore. I mean, maybe this is the way it's supposed to be,
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, though. Burnout usually has 2 ingredients, right? So there's the actual physical discomfort, right? The fatigue, this is, whatever the thing is, it's really hard. But typically you also then couple this with some sort of almost like nihilism about why am I even doing this? Like the thing I'm doing is hard and doesn't even seem to be that important. When you put those 2 together, that really becomes ripe for this sort of psychological shutdown. I used to see this with students. Students would have this sort of full burnout where they just stop being able to do schoolwork. It was usually this combination. The work got hard, and there's a sense of why am I doing this, right? Like, why am I on Zoom for 8 hours a day? I can do something really hard if I think it's really important. we're trying to get this movie done and I believe in this movie. But when it seems like I don't know why I'm even doing this, why am I sending emails? My job shouldn't be to send emails all day and I'm exhausted. That combination is where you really get to the danger of having the motivational centers of your brain basically just get innervated and say no more. Right? Pseudo productivity is designed to cause this type of burnout because it's exhausting in the sense of like you have to do all this frenetic activity. It follows you after work. That's a big part of it, right? I have a phone with me, so I have to negotiate work versus non-work at every moment. And it has the nihilistic component to it that pseudo productive activities doesn't seem to obviously be moving the bottom line. Like it's, I'm doing all this stuff, but what is it that I'm doing? I'm sending emails and I'm on Zoom. So pseudo productivity is going to really make burnout harder to avoid. So no, I don't think burnout has to be, that has to be like the necessary endpoint of a sort of capitalist endeavor. It's possible to make this a lot more sustainable, but we have to really care about what it is we're trying to do.
So have you burned out yourself? Can you tell me about your own experience with overextending yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it all comes down to, and this is one of the big revelations working on this book, sort of looking back at my own life. And I will say, by the way, I wrote this book in part for myself, right? Because I was in this interesting moment. All three of my kids entered elementary school age. They're all boys. And they suddenly needed like every minute of dad time they could get. Right. So this was we left survival mode and went to like hardcore parent mode.
Yeah.
And I felt like, okay, I'm kind of at the peak of my professional abilities. I have like every opportunity is on the table for me right now. Oh my God, like how do I navigate this? Like, how do I not give up on work and like doing stuff I'm proud of and yet not have work colonize too much of my life, because this is like a really important point for me to not be completely dominated by work. So this was really myself was on my mind when I was thinking about this. And one of my reflections is the number one culprit of any time I really feel like I'm approaching burnout is workload. Too many things I've said yes to. Like this was like the villain that sort of came out of this book that I didn't realize was hiding in the shadows is not that any of the things in these contexts are bad or that you shouldn't be working on them. It's the quantity. And that once you pass the threshold of the things you're actively working on, past a certain threshold, it's the aggregation of the administrative overhead. That is the killer. That's what creates the freneticism. That's the motive force for the freneticism. That's what moves the ratio of your work from substantive to sort of non-substantive or tangential to actual work, makes that much higher. It's always been for me, I've said yes to too many things. That's when the problem starts to happen.
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time writing about work-life balance in my column. And what I appreciate is that you don't hear a lot from working dads about striking the right balance between work and family. So I'm so glad that you're out there talking about this. And so, and you want to see your kids grow up, because that's one of my North Stars. I have two boys, 11 and 13, and my North Star is I want to be there. I want to see them grow up. They only have a few more years before they go to college, but I also want a thriving career as well, but I do overextend. I do go crazy. So that's why I love this conversation. I was just wondering, after writing this book, I mean, have you felt like you've achieved, for lack of a better term, that kind of work-life balance nirvana?
It's helped a lot. Slow productivity helped me realize, like thinking about this issue of this key window when my kids are of this certain age. There's two things you can do with, okay, I've built up these skills that are in demand. One is you say, great, I can now like move to like the next level of whatever production or success and build on that to generate more money, but also a lot more work. Or you can say another thing to leverage, like I've built up these skills, is this allows me now to be, why not take that out for a spin to be way more flexible for a while, right? Because I've sort of, I'm a tenured professor now. I've written, a bunch of books and books that generate royalties. And so slow productivity helped me feel like you could use that to simplify your life for a while. It gave me the confidence to say, great, I'm going to ratchet up the ambition maybe about the quality of what I produce while significantly slowing down the amount I produce. This gave me the vocabulary to think of that as like a completely reasonable definition of productivity.
More of my conversation with Cal Newport after this short break. All right, Cal, so I'm a business columnist, and one of the hot topics is how the pandemic has changed the way we work. And you cite some recent surveys that say even though workers have more flexibility at work, we're more stressed and less satisfied. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, the pandemic had a couple different impacts on knowledge workers that were profound, right? One of them was just the disruption, right? The disruption, I think, gave people room for reflection. And certainly early pandemic, we begin to see a lot of people questioning, what am I doing? What is this job? Is this what I want to be doing?
Yeah.
Why am I here? Why do I live here? Why am I doing this for my work? So just reflection, I think, allowed a lot of people to begin to notice some of the inanities of pseudo-productivity. The other thing that happened is the pandemic made some of the side effects of pseudo-productivity acutely worse. So they became harder to avoid, right? So one of the things that occurred, for example, was the efficiency of collaboration, right? So in the office, like if I'm working on something and I have administrative overhead, I need to get some advice from you on it. In the office in 2019, I'd wait to see that your office door was open, and then maybe I just grab you and ask you about it, right? So it wouldn't take much time, and the time it takes would be sort of dynamically allocated to make sense for you, right? When we all went remote, we said, well, I guess we'll just set up a Zoom or a Teams meeting to discuss this. But the minimum easily schedulable duration for Zoom or Teams meeting on a calendar is 30 minutes. So we had a lot of these sort of short conversations that were dynamically allocated begin to just squat in 30-minute blocks on our calendar. So this created the administrative overload footprint really expanded. And we began to get, I had, readers who would write me and say they're having 8-hour Zoom days, like
Right.
literally back to back to back to
Right.
back, right? So you put these two things together of I'm reflective about like, what is my work and why am I doing this? With making the worst parts of the work worse, that's where we got reform movement after reform movement. We had the knowledge work component to the Great Resignation. We had quiet quitting emerge in the younger generation. I think a lot of the wars around telecommuting and remote work is partially the proxy wars for just, I'm dissatisfied with knowledge work and I want to take back some control. All of that came out of, I think, these two things coming together.
So I have a confession. As a knowledge worker, I'm not sure if working from home is working out for me. I think about doing laundry all the time when I'm working from home. I am so distracted. And then when I go to the office, I find that too distracting now. Like people want to talk to me. There are all these meetings. And so what should I do?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big proponent of work from near home, right?
Okay.
I think remote work, to the extent possible, should not happen in your home. Like that is a cognitive minefield because, as you just said, you're going to see all of these salient reminders of things that are urgent and cognitively consuming that have nothing to do with your work. You'll see the laundry basket.
Yes.
You'll see the dirty dishes from the table
Yes.
where you're trying to work on
It's
something.
driving me nuts.
So I'm a big proponent of working from someplace, if you're going to be remote working, not at home, but near home. Right. In fact, I argued, so I wrote this kind of,
So where are you now?
this is an office least 5 minutes from my home.
Oh my God, you really work from near home.
I work from near home. And I argue, so I wrote this New Yorker piece that had this clever premise where I said the original knowledge workers were professional writers, right? Like they don't go to an office. I went through all of these sort of famous writers, mainly novelists, and I said, where do they actually do their writing? None of them wrote at their home. They wrote at these, and sometimes like really weird places. Peter Benchley wrote in the back of a furnace repair factory. We would have Steinbeck would like go out in a rowboat and, write on his knees. David McCullough wrote in a shed in his backyard instead of in his very nice, I have photographic evidence of his home office. It's very nice, a very nice house. He wrote in a shed in his backyard. It's because they had to escape the cognitive environment of familiarity. So I argued in that article, if I'm a company that has a remote work policy, I should be subsidizing locations for my workers to work that's near their home, right? It feels at first like, well, that's crazy. Like, why are we paying them extra money? But you're going to get twice as much done.
You already talked a lot about how we're overstimulated by social media, Slack, and email. So how do we all quiet down?
Don't keep your phone as a constant companion. It's like the easiest thing to do. Right. I mean, we're used to this idea that it's a constant companion that like I'm constantly checking I'm looking things up. I'm checking in on things. We live our lives like an air traffic controller. We're used to that, but that's very new and it's very unnatural.
Oh my God, I've never heard that term. You're right. I am like an air traffic controller.
It is. It's like, we got to launch, the missiles are incoming. Let's get it's crazy, right? So like here's an easy thing to do is like just at home, for example, just you plug your phone in like in the same place, like in the kitchen or the foyer or something like that. And it's like, that's where your phone is. And then like, if you need to go look something up, you can like go walk over to where your phone is and, look it up. And if you're expecting a call, you can put on the ringer. And it feels like an arbitrary thing, but it's not, because now it's not a constant companion. So like when you're doing other things, it's not the default thing you do. Right. That slows it down. I also recommend like do a few things every day, or at least one thing every day, out of your house or apartment without your phone. Just errands, right? Like I'm going to the drugstore.
Oh.
The term, this is from a book I wrote a little while ago called Digital Minimalism. But in that book, I talked about solitude. And I used a sort of technical definition of solitude that meant freedom from input from other minds. So it's not isolation. It's a state in which you're not processing, you're not listening to something or reading something or looking at something that someone else produced. It's you alone with your own thoughts and just looking at the world around you. Humans need that.
So in 2016, you did a TED Talk that went viral, and it was on the subject of quitting social media, why we should all quit social media. And you got a lot of backlash at the time. But now, do you feel people are coming around to what you were saying? I mean, 2016, that was a long time ago.
Yeah. No, it was night and day. It was not. In fact, you can almost pinpoint sort of exactly when the transition happened, right? So I give that talk in 2016. It's called Quit Social. I call it Quit Social Media, being deliberately provocative. People thought it was weird. They thought I was eccentric. I wrote a New York Times op-ed around that same time that was sort of saying something similar. It caused an uproar. The Times commissioned a response op-ed, which they don't usually do. Wow. 2 weeks later, they published a response op-ed about my op-ed, going through it point by point, explaining why this was wrong. Like, that's how much of an uproar this created. So people really did used to think I was eccentric. People would try to debate me, and it really was like upsetting to people. And then suddenly it wasn't. And honestly, the thing that changed that, I could really pinpoint, it was early 2017. It was actually the 2016 presidential election. A sort of dim silver lining is that for basically everyone in America, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, it recategorized how they thought about social media. So up to that point, we were still in exuberance mode. These are shiny gifts from the nerd gods, and it's just great, and we're going to like democratize everything, and it makes everyone's life better. Then the election happened, and everyone had a reason to be upset with social media after that election. So people then recategorized it as suspect. Like, well, I'm not sure about this. There might be some bad things about it. And as soon as that seal was broken, we can think critically about this, people found a lot to be upset about. So by like 2018 or 19, it was no longer at all unusual to say quit social media. 2016 and before, people thought I was either, an evil wizard or somehow had brain damage. Like, they really couldn't understand how someone in my position wasn't using social media.
We've talked about how you apply a lot of your own principles to your life. And I would imagine it's not just about productivity, but it's about happiness and satisfaction. So do you feel happier? Do you feel more satisfied with your career and your life?
Oh, yeah. I'm very sensitive to overload. Like, I'm very sensitive to pseudo productivity. So a lot of like when I think about technology and how it impacts work, a lot of it is how can I keep the world of work tolerable for me? Right. So that's why I care a lot about this, because I feel it really strong. If I get too busy, if I have a full calendar, if I have too many things I'm juggling, I feel it physiologically really strongly. Right. And so knowing that, I sort of made a career trying to explain how to do that. But that means in my own life, have been relatively successful, with some periods more successful than others, in trying to maintain autonomy, trying to keep busyness in the moment down, trying to embrace seasonality. There's a season for this and a season for that, trying to have white space in the calendar to the extent I can. It definitely made a huge difference. I mean, I would be miserable, I think, if I just fully embraced, pseudo productivity, whatever, tech startup, let's rock and roll. We can sleep when we're dead. Let's make moves. Let's make things happen. Let's jet around the world. All that type of stuff. I'd be miserable. And I've managed over years to like slowly, with intention, cultivate a professional life towards the things that resonate and away from the things that I really don't work for me. And I think it's made a huge difference. I think I definitely am much happier. I mean, I'm associated with the word productivity, but like really, if you see what I'm writing about, like the stuff I write about work, it's like deep work is about how focus is like really undervalued and like really important. And let's not undervalue this. Digital minimalism is about our bad relationship with our phones. A World Without Email is about how constant communication, how we got there and why this is really bad for us mentally and it makes us miserable. It doesn't produce things. Slow productivity, it has the word productivity in it, but it's really about reclaiming work from a sort of unsustainable busyness, So everything I talk about is usually servicing like a humanistic vision of a life well lived and how we do that in a world of high techness and distraction and email. But that humanistic vision, that's what I cared about.
Well, Cal, this has been great. You've already made a difference in my life. Hopefully my bosses will notice too. So Cal Newport is a computer science professor at Georgetown University and an author. His new book is called Slow Productivity. His podcast is Deep Questions with Cal Newport. Thank you so much, Cal, for spending this valuable time with me, because I know it is very hard to get on your schedule.
No, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, thank you for the conversation. And also, I'm a huge Boston guy, so this is extra special.
Next week.
I think I've certainly been helped because I was specifically focusing on pursuing this question of what was happening inside us and how I could not just kind of make peace with that, but kind of befriend what was happening inside me.
We continue our series, Say More, on beating burnout. Krista Tippett is host of the On Being podcast.
And that actually is my definition of spiritual life at its best, is befriending reality. And that means reality in all of its glory and its messiness.
We hope you'll listen. Today's episode was produced by Anna Kusmer. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Zuzair Ahmed. Our music is from APM Music. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.
You just heard a preview of the Say More podcast from the Boston Globe. You can listen to other Say More episodes wherever you get podcasts.